what we're looking at today is, and I can point out some of these characteristics briefly on this nice, beautiful OLED monitor. You see the out of focus area behind her is becoming oval shaped. And in particular, these lights back in the distance are becoming stretched ovularly. And that's because the entrance pupil of the lens itself is distorting the image in order to compress the light rays through it. And so that out of focus area becomes characteristically enlarged because it's in the out of focus area. So disproportionate to where the image plane is. It's actually astigmatic. So it's not focusing in the same form vertically as it is horizontally. As I throw it out of focus, you'll see the way the bokeh stretches in the background there. And you get those dazzling oval bokeh, right? And then if I pan on the light, you'll see that there's a flare. And if I look directly at the light source there, you can see that there's a little blue line, right? Anybody see J.J. Abrams' Star Trek? That's a pretty familiar movie that you might recognize some of that kind of flare. You can see that flare, you can see the sharpness. And then if I put her all the way over on the left, you know, an Orion is a pretty well-corrected image in terms of field flatness, but if I grab a Mercury lens a little bit later, we could do a comparison between an 80mm Mercury and a 72mm Orion, and then you'd be able to see the field curvature that exists a little bit more so in the Mercury. So we'd be able to do a quick comparison. The Orion series are a traditional 2x anamorphic. So in the 1950s, some of the very first widely adopted anamorphic lenses used a 2x anamorphic squeeze. So you'd get twice as wide of a field of view. And there have been many subsequent formats, including Atlas Mercury, which uses a 1.5 squeeze. So you get a 1.5 times wider field of view. We've got this awesome Red Raptor camera, and we've got the 65mm Orion here. And you'll see we still have that really nice oval bokeh. You know, highlights, you get a little bit of a wash here from the window, but not too much. So it's not washing out the image and making it completely foggy or neutralized. That's an important thing to look for if you're shooting against windows in a house, for instance, in a practical set, in a real location. And then I'll pan over and we can look at that lamp that was pointed at us for the flare and see just sort of how the flare color what's on this camera body compared to that camera body. So the color of the flares from the lenses should match, but this is just using the default color space and color transform in the LUT of each individual camera body. And so that's going to give you sort of nuanced qualities between the different lenses in terms of color and otherwise. So we've got a nice short little clip here. I racked focus to show the way the lens breathes. You know, breathing is just sort of a change of magnification as you focus. You'll notice that as I focus closer, more items come into the frame, but just slightly. We call that operator-centric breathing. So the idea is if you're trying to catch up to someone on a pan, that as you're focusing closer, you don't have to pan faster in order to keep them in frame. So if you're tracking something and they're moving, you can actually have a little bit of an advantage in terms of focus and movement there. Would you mind walking right up to the lens? Just take a step towards us to about putting your feet here. Perfect. So that's minimum focus on the 65mm Orion. And you could see just how awesome that looks. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut that, and then I'll have you do the same here, and then we'll do the lens swap. Awesome. So that's essentially the minimum focus distance for the 80mm Orion. Here we go. Awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and cut camera and then switch these lenses. So you can see the out of focus shapes are larger, rounder ovals here. You can see that the lens has a little bit more of a golden color quality to it. And the flare here, if I focus in on that lamp, we'll get a golden amber streak right through the frame there. And I'll pan over so you could see sort of the way the off-axis flare looks too. And I'll make sure she's in focus. There we go. And you can see the off-axis flare popping in from the side there. And if I could ask you to take a step up, and I'll follow focus into you as you walk towards me. And there we go. So that's minimum focus on the 72 here. And you can see that really this has a really nice control of chromatic aberration. So there's not much CA where the edges of the out of focus area have color fringing to them, right? Or any of this chrome. If we look at any of the shiny objects here, there's not like a green or magenta shift as we rack through. And then we'll go ahead and switch over to the red Raptor. And thank you, team, for making sure that the camera is set up correctly here. So I'll start at minimum focus, and we didn't quite have the 54 millimeter, which would be a little bit closer in focal length yet, but we threw the 42, which is the first lens in the Mercury series that we made. So one of the characteristics you can see, and I'll roll this, is there's a little bit more distortion to this lens. So you can see that the outer edges of the lens, there's more of a warping, like a wraparound. That's called Petzval. And if you look at the vertical lines, they bow out. That's called barrel distortion. So I'll go ahead and rack focus to our talent here. And you can see there's not much wash from the outside either. So you're able to get a really nice clean without it being washed out. And you can see that flare peeking in. And so distortion in a lens, this type of barrel distortion, can actually be a visual tool or a visual cue to create more depth in a scene and create sort of a feeling of immersion in the proscenium. So it kind of brings the viewer more into the scene as if they're actually there. And this one has an incredibly close focus. So if you'd like to stand up and walk up to me about 2 feet away from the mark. Very dynamic, perfect. So this is my favorite way to shoot an anamorphic lens, actually, right up close. I like to put the camera so close to the talent. And old anamorphic lenses back in the day didn't, for the most part, have close focus that's this close. So you would actually have to add a diopter, which is sort of like reading glasses for a lens, to the lens in order to be able to get a close-up like this. But with the Atlas Mercury series and with the Orion series, we actually have quite a bit enhanced close focus compared to many of the traditional vintage anamorphic lenses. So you have a much more dynamic and usable lens in terms of on-set performance in an environment where you have to react quickly, or you want to build sweeping movement where things change dynamically in the scene.